Hello, everybody. It's Marci from wavesofcommunication.com. Welcome to another episode of the Language Facilitation Helpline podcast, and thank you for tuning in today. The fastest results come when you enjoy the process of language facilitation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Waves of Communication channel and the Language Facilitation Helpline podcast. You are going to love my guest today. Her name is DJ, and she's an inclusion expert.
Yeah, so thank you, Marci, for having me on. So I'm a 27-year veteran educator. I was in the classroom for 20 years. And one of the frustrations about being in the classroom was that I felt like I always had questions that were not being answered. And so, even as a teacher, I was getting the same training, the same information over and over and over again. And there wasn't any expansion of knowledge. I wasn't necessarily growing myself in a way that I wanted to grow unless I went out of my way to go ahead and do the work for myself, because I knew that is what I needed to do for myself in order to benefit the kids that I worked with. So after I left the classroom, I took a district position where I was a trainer and a coach. And so I was the one that was going in and doing a lot of the training and going in and working side by side with teachers coaching. And one of the things I realized was there was just an incredible lack of information. And what I was seeing in these teachers, whether they were veteran teachers or brand new teachers, I was seeing just a lack, what I would consider to be, special education, accommodation, modification 101, like a lack of basic information on how to really support any student that fits what I call like outside the box. Our system is designed to meet the needs of the kids that fit inside the box, that fit a certain mold. And so when we look at children as a whole, all children are not the same and they don't fit into that mold. So when we have kids that need, some different needs and different supports, regardless if they have a disability or a learning difference, or they're over on the gifted side, we have children everywhere that need different supports. That doesn't make it wrong. They just need different supports in order to be successful. So I stepped away from the public system after 27 years, and I ventured out into the world of kind of solo coaching and consulting to of course continue to help schools, but number two, most importantly, get out there and help parents understand that there are ways to make things work for your kiddo and to make them more successful and independent. So that's where I am right now with coaching and consulting.
Yeah, I love that. And I know that you have a platform. We're going to talk about all the things that you provide, but one of the things that you just mentioned before I hit the record button is a meme that you just put up on your platform. Can you tell us what you said in that meme?
Yeah, so the meme is, don't let a broken system convince you that you have a broken child.
Preach, right?
Oh my gosh. Right. But I even shared something on one of my platforms this morning too, is that, when it's so true, we have a broken system, and we have a system that convinces parents and can even go as far as to convince children that they are broken, that they are low, that they are deficient, that they are below proficiency, that we're growing this group of children and parents that believe that about their child because it is coming from a system that's broken.
Yeah, and these terms, this vocabulary that you're using, low level and below average and under your peers and impairment, because in order to get assistance in special education, these labels have to be doled out, before it comes out. And I think that's where a lot of the parents that follow my platform already start to get a feeling that the system is not in place to help them. When they present their child, a lot of the parents on my platform are here in their very first introduction into school because they're late talkers.
Right.
They're in the preschool end, they're being transitioned in out of early intervention, and they're going into these preschool programs. And the volume of children that are late talking coming in is causing the system to create these specialized classrooms that actually sort of separate these kids who are challenged from other kids who are showing those in the box behaviors. They meet the criteria. You know, as I use all these vocabulary, it's so interesting in this process of evaluation and labeling and categorization. Does your child fit in this kind of class or this kind of class? I think that's where the process starts to break down. Would you agree?
I would agree, and it saddens me. And all I can do is shake my head and kind of hang my head and think, how is there a breakdown of the system when children are 3 and 4 years old? How are we deciding at that age that they are low and below? And so, if I can just give an example, this goes back probably 6 months ago. I was working with a parent and attempting to work alongside her teacher at school. And so this mom was really frustrated that her child wasn't holding a pencil yet. So her child was 4. And I said, well, that's okay. That she goes, no, it's, it's the expectation that he's able to hold a pencil. And so what the teacher is doing is she is taking his hand, and she's putting a pencil in his hand, and she is rubber banding his fingers around his hand, because that is her way of getting him to grow his hand strength in order to hold a pencil. And I was like, oh my gosh, let's take a step back here. If number one, at 4 years old, if we're saying that the kids are below standard, they're low, they're behind when they're 4 years old, we're setting parents up, we're setting children up for failure. That is ridiculous. This was a situation where the teacher needed to be armed with the tools that she needed in order to, meet the needs of this child in terms of hand strength. And I say hand strength kind of with a grain of salt, because ultimately what he needed was Play-Doh, Legos, blocks, things to build up naturally. That's kind of a natural kind of progression when you're 4. Like, that's the work of children is play. And so why wouldn't we naturally and organically build up those muscles? And I was even explaining to the parent, the difference between a 4-year-old's hand structure and a 7-year-old's hand structure is very, very different. And so it's possible, because all children grow differently too, that his little hand isn't ready yet to hold a pencil, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think that's what I want to talk about too. So if we sort of use this analogy and shift it over to a child who's not talking yet, I'm sure you can share a story about that too.
Sure.
And the kind of ways that you help them. But when I think about the parents that are here, it really comes down to the expectations. So somewhere in this system lies somebody with real smarts and a lot of letters behind their name and access to power, created this curriculum and these expectations that by 4 years old, every child should be doing X, Y, or Z. And the same's happening with speech. By 2 years old, they should be doing whatever. And these kids are already 3 and 4 years old in the preschool, and they are way behind if they're nonverbal or just limited verbal. Remember, they're also showing up at school with more anxiety and blockage and all of that. So they're not demonstrating functionally the abilities they can, because even this little guy who couldn't hold a pencil probably at home is doing all kinds of things that demonstrate that he has hand strength. But the idea and experience of having adults project their solutions based on, I don't know where they learned how to do the rubber band trick, this, this teacher's idea to do that. And the experience of having this child live through these adults problem solving to try to make them meet the expectation that the school doesn't have. So, I mean, partly it could be the expectation of the school is too much for the child. And the idea is we've got to get the kid, rise them up, because we're focusing on the fact that they're low and down and under, and it causes people to do things that are unreasonable. Just because they're focused on the expectation and the outcome and not on what the child really needs to help them get there.
Right, right. So yeah, you touched on a couple different things. So first of all, learning outcomes. Of course, we want to have learning outcomes, but the process and how we get there needs to be a little more fine-tuned. The other piece of what you just said is, we have such a broken system that has not evolved as children evolve. And so, being in a school and as a teacher, and then being out there as a coach and experiencing multiple different schools and even things at a state level, things are not changing and moving and adjusting in ways that parents and kids need them to adjust. I mean, we also have to take into consideration, we're coming out of a pandemic. And so you've got these little kiddos too that have been through a lot. They've been through a lot. And so, taking it back to, the communication piece, I was working with a parent recently who was very frustrated by the fact that, she has a 4-year-old kiddo that is not, he's not typically verbal. He has very, very low language skills, but he's learning and he's growing, and he is making, word approximations. And so the people that are close to him are beginning to understand him more, and they're encouraging conversation, and, the family is wonderful in there. And so they're working with him, but they needed something extra, because what they were finding at school is the teacher would just say, well, he needs to start talking. And so I said, and I told her, I said, so I'm not a speech pathologist, but I can certainly support you in knowing what to ask for or what to suggest in terms of support in the classroom to get him more engaged and more confident, and start, supporting some of those communication skills. And so I asked what was in place, and she says, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I said, well, are they using visuals? Are there things for him to see? Is when he's being asked a question, are they giving him some visual options? Are they providing him with some real objects? And the answer sadly was no. And so, I created some visuals for her, to use at home, but also to use in the classroom, and gave her, like a little mini tutorial on how to explain this to the teacher. And the teacher had never thought that there might be a need for this. And that's sad, not just for this child, but for children that are that age in general, that, it goes back to learning styles. I'm not an auditory learner. I'm a middle-aged woman. I am not an auditory learner. I need visuals. I need visual things that remind me and trigger things for me and help me process my information. It's the same thing for kids. So why are we building these, little academic communities for kids where we're only providing them with auditory learning? So they need auditory and tactile and the kinesthetic and visual. They need all of that in order to make sense of their environment. So it's been an interesting, process, kind of working with this parent to help her help the school.
Yeah, I think that's it. And every situation is different, right? So because you're going to have a level, we talked about sort of this spectrum or range of mindset regarding the value and ability for school to help your kid. Why do we send our kids to school, right? Because at school, they can learn things that we can't teach them at home. They have exposure to peers. They have brilliant teachers who are skilled at teaching methods that can teach them the math and the reading and the things they need so that they can grow up to be big kids and who are responsible and get jobs and grow up to be adults, right? I mean, the whole reason that these systems exist is to support a child as they grow in their independence. And I think there is a difference. I think what schools are changing to do more and more now is isolate these kids because they feel that there is a more intensive need for them than there is for other kids. And this artificial sort of rapid training in these behavior classrooms that are ABA based and even exchange-based picture systems like PEX systems and things like that, where the shift has shifted in the system from a more natural training, like you said, with using toys and Play-Doh and natural experiences, visuals of real objects for the child to engage with instead of just listening to the one story with the whole class, where they can hold objects and experience things and help them learn to connect better. Where there is this difference, and I think that parents are seeing that there is a choice, right? Because districts are evolving in response to parents coming to them. We live in Florida, and this is a really volatile state as far as education goes. And we've got people all along the spectrum. We talked about ultra-conservative minds of families that feel like the school is the place that should be teaching their child all the things, but yet they want the school to be teaching only the things that they want their child to learn. So they take them to the conservative school or the out school, the liberal school that doesn't make the kids sit in classrooms and desks at all, and they're all in the world and out learning that way, and the kids don't get the structure and organization and things like that they need. I think what you're trying to help parents is to find some place in the middle, because it really does require both. Kids do need structure, and they need accommodations, and they need systems, and they need visuals, and they need real tools to help them learn, right? Yet there has to be some flexibility in that.
Absolutely. And I talk a lot about flexibility, accessibility, and then engagement. So when it comes to having structure, yes, there has to be structure, but for some kids, structure is going to look and feel a little bit different. So, we do have kids where for them to feel like they're in a structure, maybe they have a visual schedule on their desk. Maybe they have a little timer that whether it's a sand timer or another, visual digital timer, they have something like that helps them with the structure. I think that traditional structure in the classroom, how teachers are traditionally taught, that in the box, training that most teachers get, that can be very overwhelming for some kids when they need a little bit more to help them stay focused and to help with that structure so they can feel confident in what's going to happen next, confident in the time that something is going to take. I just remember being in the classroom, and I had a couple kiddos that would get very, very anxious if they didn't know how long something was going to take. So you take, in like a traditional, school setting, you've got a time for reading during the day, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. That's a very long time. And so for some of my kiddos, I had to chunk that time up and let them know, we're going to work for 10 minutes on this, 10 minutes on independent reading, 10 minutes in group work, and I had to break everything down in order to alleviate some of that anxiety. Because, when you have, if we can alleviate anxiety or that fear of, well, what's going to happen next and how long is this going to take? And I can't focus because I know something else is coming, but I don't know when it's coming. And then, then they're not focused. And then, I'm going to use this term loosely, and that's behavior. And I'm even going to put it in air quotes. Then there's that lack of focus, lack of attention and engagement that kind of comes when there's that sense of anxiety, because we haven't provided the amount of structure that someone might need. So just the word structure itself looks different. So like within the confines of a traditional structure, we do have kids that might need that to be adjusted a little. Not that we want to undo structure, very important, but we need to be flexible.
Inclusion of everyone in the structured day. It has to be a structured day. A teacher is responsible to rank and educate an entire group of children all by herself with limited assistance. I mean, it's a big job, and they've got responsibility coming from the top down that you've got to teach this curriculum in this way and this timeline. Right? Because tests are coming, and if your kids don't pass the test, there's a lot of pressure and anxiety in this whole process. And I think the idea of understanding where everyone is coming from, the teacher and the student, this is really important. Now, I want to talk to you, or have you talk to us about another situation. So I've got a lot of families that are around the world in schools that don't have special education programs. They basically are in the box schools. And if you have a child who has some different learning, the schools just say, you have to hire someone. And they call them shadow teachers, which would be kind of what we would use as a resource person in United States schools. And they're hiring these people, and the schools are saying, yeah, get someone who's RBT, registered behavior trained, get somebody who has that so that they can make your kid compliant in the classroom. But I think that you could help us by sharing some characteristics, like the job of that shadow teacher is really doing the job of these tools, right? The timers and the visual schedules and things like that, and even helping a child by using those things to fade them out as they are increasingly able to participate and engage in the structure. So, can you share for us some characteristics, like what are the jobs and roles of that shadow teacher to help make that child more successful in a school that isn't accommodating them?
So I love that you use the word compliant and then you use the word successful. Those are very different things. We can make children compliant. That does not mean that they are learners and that they're being successful. So the compliant children are children that are simply following along, following the order of things and fitting inside the box. If we want children to be successful, these shadow teachers need to know how to make some of this learning accessible for these kiddos that are learning differently and that are experiencing education differently. So the first thing, to even talk about, characteristically is these are probably kids that need some type of assistive technology. And so assistive technology, I love to talk about this. Assistive technology is such a fantastic classroom tool that if teachers are equipped with the knowledge of how assistive technology can benefit kids in the classroom, whether it's something as simple as text to speech and speech to text, or taking an online program that can help summarize a passage for a student. Or again, it goes back to the visuals that we're giving them. We're teaching teachers on how to make things accessible so they can share that with students. When teachers can show students what to use for themselves, then we start to grow successful children. We help them be independent, and we can help them understand the tools that they need. And so, it's teaching how to be accessible. And then it's also teaching, the flexibility piece too. We can have kids be compliant and sit in a chair. But if you've got 20 kids that are sitting in a chair and you've got 2 kids that they just cannot do that. Like what's your learning outcome? Do you want them sitting in a chair or do you want them engaged? And so possibly the role of that shadow teacher is to support a child. And okay, you don't have to necessarily sit in the chair, but you can find a spot on the floor. You can work with a partner. You can stand at like a standing station in the back of the classroom, because ultimately we want kids learning. We want them growing and experiencing what they're learning so they have a deeper understanding, and not living in a world where they're just kind of retelling and restating something that was told to them by their teacher. There's a difference between that and really engaging in the learning that they're doing. So to me, the role of that shadow teacher is supporting independence, supporting that engagement, and really showing kids, especially as they get older, how kids can use tools to be independent and be confident. And that way kids know what it is that they need. And then then we can back away from having that shadow teacher, and suddenly that child is in the classroom with the rest of their peers. They have some different supports. But if we look at, I don't know, in my perfect educational world, everyone has what they need. Everyone has what they need in order to be successful, and no one has a label, and kids know what their choices are in terms of supports that they might need. The thought of hiring a shadow teacher or an additional person that's going to go in and just follow a student around or insist on the compliance or kind of forcing that compliance, we set kids up for failure when we do that, because we're not growing independence and we're not teaching them that it's okay to use some of these tools, because that's just something that you need to be supportive.
Right. And we all use tools. Let's just call them life hacks. Life hacks. If you are not good with numbers, you know where the calculator app is on your phone. If you're not good with geography, you know where the maps is on your GPS. You know where it is.
Right.
And your new habit is to use the tool. You stop struggling. Gee, I'm bad at directions. I got to write a map or whatever. Oh, look at, there's this new assistive technology. And the other thing too is, that's why I love this role of the shadow teacher, is they're training the child to use these things. And it doesn't have to be text or text to speech. If your child is using spoken language, they can facilitate spoken language using the strategies on my platform. But these visual things, that remember, this is the job, is to help the child be successful. If they are not comfortable using speech to communicate with peers, having some kind of a talkie box to be able to say, hi guys, they're not going to use it forever.
No.
They're going to use it until they don't need it anymore. And if it is a seamless app, like we all use Google Maps now that we never used to in the past, we used to ask, stop at gas stations and say which, you know what I mean? All the different things that have evolved are coming out now. And remember, the other thing that your shadow has the opportunity to do, your shadow teacher has the opportunity to do, and I noticed this a lot, when you had a really good resource teacher who came into the classroom and they were working with that child. Obviously, they were dedicated to that one child, but they were working on skills to be independent. They were showing those life hacks. Mm-hmm. Other kids in the class were watching and they were like, hey, that's a nice, easy way to do that. I want to try that too. And that's why if everybody in the class has everything they need, kids learn from each other. And they will learn how to use those hacks. And this is what we want. That's inclusive learning. I'm good at this. You're good at that. How do we work together to teach each other and get the same outcome? These cooperative experiences. And that's the other role that I would say that the shadow teacher is doing, is helping the child assimilate into, like you said, access the curriculum, not just access to learn and memorize it and get through it, compliance, but access it because it's designed to help them as a scaffolding that they build on, right? You go to first grade to learn everything you need to go to second grade, and all of that moving on forward. And I think that's what's so important about this.
When it comes to, assimilating into the classroom and doing some of that cooperative learning, I think it's important that we give children multiple ways of how to be cooperative. We have lots of kids, they are great in a group. We have other kids that maybe need to work with just a partner.
Right.
And that's okay. That's okay. Or kids that need to work independently for a little bit and then come together with a partner. Or maybe
with the shadow teacher, and then the shadow teacher and one partner, and then help them move into, because that's the idea, is the assimilation. The teachers have no choice but to expect kids to show up ready to be learners on day one. They don't have a choice. They have to have that expectation. So that's why they're handing it back to you as a mom, or they're handing it over to their special education staff, or whatever, because they have the responsibility to help their whole classroom. And obviously, like you, I am an advocate for inclusion of these kids, getting them together so they can observe kids that are doing better than they are. Because honestly, if we separate these kids just because they're late talking, they're not able to show other kids how brilliant they are at pattern learning and math and all of these other things that they are excellent at. Those other talky kids that can't, keep their logic straight because they're too busy telling stories and all that other stuff. They're watching these kids dig in and buckle down and learn their phonics and do their math and memorize these things, because everybody has different abilities. And just because you're learning different doesn't mean that you are less or below or under or impaired or any of that other stuff.
Absolutely. And just what you said about, children learning from each other, if you have a kiddo that's a late talker, wouldn't it be wonderful to immerse them in a language rich environment?
It's necessary. It's not
absolutely necessary.
They're late. They need the exposure. They missed it. During COVID, they were physically, socially distanced from it. So if your child is under 6 years old, key important language and social learning that is the expectation of these teachers didn't happen. So more and more of your kids are showing up on day one of school, not meeting the expectations of the parents. They could be in between though, right? Maybe not qualifying for special ed, but they just had a really quiet experience over the past couple of years, or isolated experience over the past couple of years. What kind of advice do you have for those parents to maybe they can work at home with their kids, a few things that they can do like extra that will help their kids show up a little bit more prepared?
So I think for parents, just working on, so if there's homework that's coming home, talking through different ways of working through a problem, showing their kids that there's multiple ways to solve a problem or to do something, giving their child a choice of what to do first, just giving them some flexibility and I don't know if you're referring specifically to homework. I have mixed feelings about homework that comes from school, but I think for parents to know what's happening in the classroom, but then parents know their children the best. And so, if you can work with your child on what it is that their strength is and grow from there. So,
Okay.
what might come home from school, maybe they're not ready yet to work through that, but that you're building on the strength of your child at home, and that is always the primary focus, is the strength of your child.